You're watching the Eternal Tournament Series.
Welcome, everybody, to the Eternal Tournament Series. This is Season 1, Week 8. This is our first week with Dead Reckoning cards. I am Callum Deer, and joining me in the booth today is LocoPojo.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? Pretty excited to be here, and hopefully we'll be seeing some sweet games tonight.
Yeah, so not only is this our first week with the Dead Reckoning cards, but it's also, I believe, our last week before the Invitational and the LCQ tomorrow. So this is a pretty important weekend.
Yeah, it's going to be a pretty exciting time, and going to be a lot of people trying to get that final ticket into the Invitational.
Yeah, hoping to see a lot of the new Primal cards today. I think that's what most people are looking at. But there's a couple other cool cards that I'm sure we'll all be looking out for. In this first matchup, though, we do have two Primal decks going head to head. Do you want to break down the matchup a little bit for us?
Yeah, first up, we have Serb on Elysian Horn. He's playing a new sort of Elysian type deck with a lot of Overwhelm units. He's actually using Doraka Queen's Guard, the new card from the latest set, as well as 4 of the new Hailstorm. And we're going to see those cards hopefully making a difference on Elysian's overall power level. This is going to be pretty exciting stuff. I'm actually really psyched about these cards showing up in the decks, and should be a pretty good time.
Yeah. Meanwhile, we have Bikespokes playing a Huru mid-range flyers list, pretty similar to lists we've seen around, but playing 2 copies of Island. The biggest addition here is the 4 copies of Huru Pacifier, which have synergy with Unseen Commando. So it's just a deck looking to play out its threats on curve and get up to Amili's and Nostrix.
Yeah, that Huru Pacifier is a really big addition to the whole Huru archetype, and I think that that should actually really improve the Flyers deck as a whole. So, yeah, we see a lot of good stuff with that, and that card, of course, works really well with Unseen Commando. The two of them together are just a deadly pair.
Looks like players are starting to get into their match. Who do you think is favored here?
Let's see here. So we have a pretty sizable amount of just big stuff on Serb's side, along with life gain, and the Sandstorm Titans are a meaningful impact on the game. But at the same time, I don't think that Bikespokes is running that many answers to Titan. He's got the 3 finest hours. He's got the Valkyrie Enforcers. He's got the what's the last one? The Vanquishes as well. But I'm not sure if he's going to be able to necessarily punch through all of that life gain. I think I'm slightly on the side of the Huru deck winning, but it really depends on how well those Titans do and whether or not those Shepherd's Horn come down early.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you. I think Bikespokes is a little favored. I think both decks are trying to play out big creatures on curve for the most part. But Bikespokes, unless there's a Sandstorm Titan on the battlefield, is going to have the advantage in combat because he can get through for damage, and he's still back there to block with his flyers.
Yeah, so we see Serb with the Shepherd's Horn in hand, throwing a Permafrost at a 2/2 Tinker Overseer just to get it out of the way. Once he plays Shepherd's Horn, he'll be able to play False Princess for 2, which means he'll be able to get 2 of them next turn, but he can't Crest of Wisdom here, so that might make it a little bit tricky. And instead of playing Horn, he's going to build out his Overwhelm units first and try to sort of focus down his opponent.
Yeah, meanwhile, Bikespokes really just needs to draw another Justice source so he can start getting down this Shelter Wing Rider.
Yeah, he has access to that Lightning Strike, which is a great answer to the False Prince. But beyond that, he's sort of looking for double justice for everything in his hand, including triple justice for Nostrix and Amili. So he really needs that influence. This deck is pretty tight on influence requirements, and if you don't have it in your opening hand, it can be really tricky to recover.
Yeah, and Valkyrie Forcer is, I think, still one of the best cards in Eternal, but it doesn't look very good in this particular hand. False Prince, not really something you want to silence, and freeing up your 2/2, you're losing the most important text on it, which is flying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can't remember if Bikespokes shipped this hand, but it does. It is very difficult if you don't have that second justice, because all of your 3-drops, all of your 4-drops, I think almost all of your cards have a double justice requirement on them. Unseen, Valkyrie, Pacifier, Rider, and Cloud Marshal. Basically every unit in his deck, aside from Overseer and Kothan, have a double justice requirement. So not being able to hit that is going to be pretty tricky for him.
Yeah. Bikespokes deck is playing 27 power, but it's not playing any Seeks or Favors. It is playing 3 Strategize, though, to help fix some of those issues, but 27 power is more what you'd typically see from something like a Stone Scar Burn or Rakano build that plays no additional stuff. So it's a pretty aggressive power base for something like this.
Yeah. All right, so Bikespokes played a Finest Hour on the Frog to turn it in, or on the False Prince to turn it into a Frog. However, he did that during combat, so he takes a full 4 damage out of it. I think there's some value to actually holding the surprise, but that's a little bit of health loss that he probably is going to want back later.
Yeah. Yeah, you want to try and use the Finest Hour on your turn against False Prince whenever you can.
Yeah, okay, so with the Shepherd's Horn and the False Prince, Serb is gaining his life back. He's not going to be too worried about racing in the air. It's just a matter of like whether or not he can get any sort of presence down on the ground, because the Xenon Initiation allows him to control the board, but everything else here is going to be very tricky. Like it's just like the False Prince can't take the Xenon Initiation, so he's not going to be able to deal a lot of damage to his opponent. And if his opponent has ways to kill the False Princes, then there's nothing here that Serb can really do about flyers rushing in every turn.
Yeah, right now both players are kind of just hoping to see what they draw. Bikespokes just not able to play his cards, and Serb having kind of the wrong cards for what Bikespokes has played. Lightning Storm obviously very good if there's a swarm of 2/2s on the board, but Bikespokes deck just
there's
that's
the
a good
two
card.
answers he was looking for. He can Lightning Storm to pop the Aegis on the Sheltering Rider, but at this point he's probably pretty satisfied just plopping down a Sandstorm Titan and calling it good. Even a Cerso would be very solid here, just because that way he would maybe draw some removal away from the Titan, which is arguably the most important card in his deck. And even with the ability to push with his Overwhelm units, he's doing just fine.
Yeah, had he played the Cerso, I think the Cerso could potentially eat this Valkyrie Enforcer Silence, and then the Sandstorm Titan would come down with no answer. But it's definitely a close play, a close call there.
Yeah, Cerso is an interesting card against Sheltering Rider, because if it attacks into a Sheltering Rider, it pops the Aegis, but that renders the Sheltering Rider to a 0/5. So you have a bunch of 2/2s and a 0/5 blocking Cerso, and the math gets a little weird. It's interesting. I think it's actually generally better for the Cerso, but
Yeah.
As opposed to most Aegis units, where if you pop the Aegis on them, it's kind of bad for Cerso, and it means that you actually get better blocks on the Aegis side.
And drawing that second Titan here, I think is going to just be put Bikespokes too far behind, unless we see his third Justice Source come down. But even then, Nostrix, I don't know if it's going to be enough to turn this around, because he can't block Cerso, and he's almost just dead here.
Yeah, I think the Shepherd's Horn makes a huge difference against the entire board of Bikespokes, just because the Huru Flyer Stick really wants to race. It is pretty comfy against some like big mid-range decks, because it can usually out-damage them. But if you've got the Shepherd's Horn down, then the deck is gaining life in addition to playing down all of its big units, and you certainly can't block those big units.
Yeah, I'm going to have to agree with you there. Typically, against time decks, Huru Flyers are pretty favored, just because you get to deal your damage and your opponent doesn't. But when your opponent's gaining life, they don't care that much. So the matchup kind of turns around a little bit. But now our players are going to go to their sideboards. Does this matchup get better for either player here?
I say it's pretty tricky. Like, Serb is already running 4 Hailstorms in his opener, so he has access to a couple of new things, but none of them are looking like particularly important. He's got Scorpion Wasp, he's got Rain of Frogs, he has a couple of cards that are okay against flyers, but honestly, I don't think he really needs to change up his strategy very much. The Polymorphs might be nice for knocking a few flyers out, but for the most part, it's pretty inefficient, as opposed to just playing units and then giving them Xenon initiations. So I think that Serb's deck isn't getting a lot better. In the meantime, the Hoodoo Flyers deck can run things like Bring Down, Vanquish, and potentially Rain of Frogs. But again, there's not like a huge amount in the sideboard that's going to make a difference here. I'd say primarily the extra Vanquish coming in is going to improve Bikespokes' chances a little bit. And it's a toss-up if he wants to add anything else. Rain of Frogs is particularly nice.
I think that the Permafrost is actually something I'd be looking to bring in here. Just an efficient answer to basically everything but Titan.
Yeah, I'd say that is actually a pretty good option. 2
Yeah.
permafrosts and 1 vanquish. That's a little bit of extra removal that definitely helps out, and he could probably cut maybe the protects for them, just because the Elysian Horn is not really looking to use a lot of removal. Like it's got Lightning Storm and it's got a couple of cards that can pop the Aegises, which is important for Sheltering Rider, but most of the time it's trying to kill you with Xenon Initiation or Twilight Hunt.
Yeah, this is a much more controlling Elysian list than we typically see. It does have more removal than we see, but the removal is once again not in the form of cards like Annihilate or Vanquish or typical removal. It doesn't target your opponent's units. It just gives your units killer.
Yeah, there are those 4 permafrosts at least, but nonetheless, I'm not sure if the protects are super necessary here, and Bikespokes might really be wanting to try and leverage a very early advantage, since the late game doesn't favor him at all.
I think the late game isn't terrible for him, but just once there's too many horns out, he might not be able to erase anything. But Island Clan Mother and Nostrix are not to be underestimated. The problem I do see though is that with 27 power sources, it's going to be very difficult to get to those cards, especially when they're triple justice.
Yep, it's a tricky scenario. Like he does just have to have the influence for his cards, and if he doesn't have that, that's going to be tricky. But there's not too much difficulty in getting that out. He does have at least the banners and the seats. No crests here. I'm not sure. I don't think there are Huru crests.
No, unfortunately not.
But yeah, so he's primarily running off of monuments and waystones, and he has, I think, more primal. No, he's got more justice sources than he has primal sources, but it's a close thing, and I think he does need to definitely get that to get things going.
Yeah. Well, it looks like players have figured out what their sideboards are. I still think Bikespokes might be a little favored, but in this opening hand, we do have the Shepherd's Horn, which typically I'm not a huge fan of cards that don't do anything when they come down, or cards that only gain life. But I think in a matchup so revolving around racing each other.
Yeah, Shepherd's Horn is a solid exception. It's a very strong 3-drop relic, and really the time cards in general have some pretty solid relics that can make a lot of difference in combat, even if they don't do anything on board. Like stuff like the Shepherd's Horn, you can do Obelisk, you can do Infinite Hourglass. Like there's a lot of things that you can really leverage for a lot of advantage. But like right here, like the Overwhelm Horn stuff, it's been proven to be pretty effective, and it's a solid way to just sort of get that discount and get a ton of threats on the board very quickly. On the other hand, Serb doesn't have a lot of threats, so that's going to make things a little tricky for him.
Yeah, the other cool thing about Serb's deck is that typically the Horn decks are a bit slow. That's why he's gone for this Hailstorm, Lightning Storm variant, which I think is kind of a cool choice.
Yeah, that is the Hailstorm in particular is just very, very important for getting rid of any sort of Rakano type stuff, anything that's gonna mess with you in the early game. And this is like one of the big boons to Elysian in the upcoming set. Serb is opting for the Rain of Frogs from his sideboard, and he's pulled it out, but Bikespokes does have a Protect in hand, so that's not really going to hit anything. Just pops an Aegis, and overall, pretty inefficient. Serb doesn't really have another threat here, so he's going to be going pretty slowly. But on the other hand, Bikespokes hasn't really played any threats either.
Yeah, looks like both players are going a little slow, like you said. Bikespoke he's going to be able to get down the Sheltering Rider though, and there's not really an answer from Serb's side for quite some time. There's going to be trading damage until this Permafrost comes down.
Yeah, the main issue here is that Bikespokes has the Lightning Strike, so he's capable of taking out the False Prince without any issues. It's he doesn't have another power here, so he's basically just relying on Sheltering Rider to get across. Serb can pop the Aegis on that with a Hailstorm if he chooses to, which neutralizes the Sheltering Rider and gives him a lot more time to set up his Shepherd's Horn and just get moving.
Yeah, I'm really liking Bikespoke's position here though, just because he's drawn more threats this game, and I think that is a big part of what this matchup is about.
Yeah, it's possible. Certainly, Bikespokes has to get another 2 power, and at least one of them has to be Primal Influence. Once he has that, though, I think he's in much better shape, and picking up a Sheltering Rider here definitely helps out. With the Vanquishes in hand, his removal was actually quite a bit stronger, but Serb does have the Unseal and can therefore protect his 1 unit on board.
Well, Don't worry, there's another Vanquish ready for this Reinhardt.
Yeah, I think the density of Bikespokes removal right now is probably helping a lot more than anything else in the deck.
Yeah.
But Serb rips the
Looks like he
Sandstorm
should have
Titan.
used that Permafrost instead of one of those Vanquishes.
Yep, yeah, definitely the Vanquish was a bad idea here. He does have to be able to answer the Sandstorm Titan, and plopping the second Sheltering Rider down exposes him to the Hailstorm. Suddenly, Bikespokes' position is looking a lot worse.
That's a pretty reasonable Hailstorm.
Yeah, didn't get rid of anything, but it popped 2 Aegises. Sort of a solid job. And Hailstorm plays often as much of a role as Lightning Storm does in doing things against Aegis decks.
Yeah, well, and particularly Sheltering Rider, which is barely a card once it loses Aegis.
The Valkyrie Enforcer comes down, silences the Sandstorm Titan so that everything can fly again, but that's not enough to deal with the Titan, so a good old Permafrost is applied as well.
Yep. Had to shut that Titan up before we could freeze it. Took a lot of effort, took a lot of removal spells, but we got him down.
Yeah, Bikespokes is still drawing gas, but he's also drawing still a lot of 5-drops, and he has not picked up power yet. The Huru Pacifier gives him a little something to play with, and Serb picking up 2 cards that work okay with Scorpion Wasp, but aren't generally great on their own. Probably not feeling too happy about his hand right now.
Yeah, Scorpion Wasp is the thing I didn't quite notice from Serb's sideboard, that it obviously is very good against a deck filled with flying units. But Xena Initiation Twilight Hunt on Scorpion Wasp is not particularly high value. That's something you see more in the Xenon decks that have Dark Return. Here is
I'm fairly skeptical about Scorpion Wasp in the side here. Like, it is a good card for removing specific threats, but also against like the flyer decks, like it usually doesn't get quite as efficient of a removal because most of the flyers are costed 3 to 4.
Right.
It is nice for getting rid of an Amelie or something really huge like a Nostrix or an Eilin, but it's also just like a little bit tricky to get a lot of value out of it, which is sort of the kind of swing you're looking for.
Here is the dream killer target here.
Oh, yeah. World Bear Behemoth is a fun killer, and the Twilight Hunt even gives it a +1/+1 bonus because it's a dinosaur. So with a full 4 damage Overwhelm and the ability to wipe out that Valkyrie, Bikespokes gets the Nightfall draw, so he finally picks up his 5th power, but now there's just a way too big engine charging in every turn and getting a ton of power out of the deck.
Yeah, now we have Surso, which can come down with killer, World Bear, which can just get killer and deal with this Amelie, or Daraka Queen's Guard. He's got his pick of the litter here for how he wants to deal with this Amelie.
Yep, and down they go with the Overwhelm damage there. He can live for another turn by blocking with his Sheltering Rider, but this is looking really bad. Bikespokes still doesn't have very good answers. His Lightning Strike is basically useless against the later parts of the field, and Amelie's just not solving that problem.
Yeah, and Daraka not even needed. That's going to be Serb taking it 2-0 over Bikespokes. Bikespokes just not able to deploy his threats out as efficiently. And I think you're correct about the late game, especially that sort of like 5 to 6 area being a lot stronger out of the Elysian deck with cards like Daraka and Surso just getting so much value on their own.
Yeah, there's no way to race. There's no way to block. It's just really, really difficult if you aren't playing enough of an aggressive curve. I generally favor Huru Flyers in that matchup, but most Huru Flyers decks are running a lot more 2-drops and things like Ikaria or other types of captains and other delightful things. But now this one is just running like 3s and 4s and 5s, kind of a mid-rangey style deck. And Bikespokes had power problems both games. Like he was not able to get the influence or the necessary power to play 5-drops, which is not what you should expect in a tournament level deck. You want to have like lots of things in that lower end curve.
I think when you're playing 7-drops, you want to have a bit more than 27 power in your list, but alas. So that's going to be it for that match. I'm not sure if we have any backups for round 1. I'm sure there's still.
Yep. We're looking at backups at the moment. We should hopefully have something for you soon. There's a couple of different potentials. We're looking at some different options, but pretty crazy game, and I'm excited to see more Elysian in particular in this tournament. Like this is something that I'm really rooting for, is the power of Hailstorm making a huge difference. I'm guessing there aren't as many Rakano decks in the current tournament list, but if there are, they're probably having some issues right now.
Yeah. I definitely am a big fan of Hailstorm and Duraka as well. I think some people are underestimating the power of that card. Um,
Yeah.
Speaking of Elysian, though, how do you feel about Equivocate?
Equivocate. I like it. Overall, like I think that teleport is a fairly playable card, and a better teleport is certainly nice. That randomness element means that it is a little bit harder to use it on yourself as a defensive measure, but you usually don't want to be doing that anyways. As an offensive measure, it's really quite strong, and the Mind Link ability, where you can just transform one of your opponent's drops into something by putting it into their hand and then play your own copy. That's really fun, and I'm hoping that we see some Mind Link decks out on the ladder.
Yeah, so for those of you who don't know, Equivocate is one of the new cards in Dead Reckoning. It is almost identical to Teleport, except that it costs 1 primal in addition to 1 time, and it transforms the unit that once it goes back into the opponent's hand. So that's really cool to just deal with a threat in a more permanent manner than Teleport typically does.
Yep. Yeah, I'm pretty excited to see it used. There are certainly some cool things that you could potentially be transforming, and I'm pretty excited about that as well. There's a couple of cards out there that, like most cards, like if you create them, there are a couple of like 0-drops that are pretty fun to transform into frogs. There's some interesting things that you can do with it, and the question of like what is the best time to equivocate and against what targets is a really interesting one. I think it's fairly good all the way up to like 4 or 5, and then like you have to be a little bit careful around like the 6 or 7s. There's some pretty powerful summon effects up there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we have a backup match coming for you guys.
Yeah, we're looking for Mouche versus somebody.
SooNo.
SooNo. And
It looks like Mouche is playing JPS control, and SooNo is playing a Feln control list. So yeah, just to finish that thought, yeah, I think any fast speed spell is really cool, and I think the power in Equivocate really lies in the faction combination, because obviously when you compare it to a card like Annihilate, it doesn't seem that impressive, but giving Time Primal access to an efficient removal spell is very powerful.
Yep. As always, it's not card advantage. It is a card that just adds tempo to your setup. And there's a lot of time stuff in that vein. Teleport, Hesitate, the Praxis Displacer. But those cards can be very, very helpful if you're setting up any sort of aggro style. And they can also be good if you're just trying to weaken a particular part of your opponent's board. So I think it's a reasonably strong card for Elysian, and something that should probably see some play in Elysian fast to mid-range decks.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like we're about to get underway here. So we're coming to the game. Both players here at 7 power, so a lot has gone on. I'm not sure.
Mouche is down 1 in this game.
Okay.
SooNo's sitting on a Champion of Cunning with almost full activation. He's missing the Shadow here, so he doesn't quite have everything that he needs to do the full like Champion of Cunning combo, but this card can still take over a game very quickly. Mouche, on the other hand, is looking at a Channel the Tempest, an Island's Choice. He can pop the Aegis on Champion and then kill it. However, it is pretty difficult for this deck to deal with those Champion of Cunnings, and if SooNo has more access to more of them, it's going to be quite an issue for him.
Yeah, I kind of generally like the 2-color, the 2-faction control list in a lot of these control mirrors, just because it generally is a bit more consistent, especially in the Feln mirrors, because of how powerful Champion of Cunning is in these matchups. But Channel the Tempest is not to be trifled with.
Yeah, Mouche strategizing here actually pitches his Throne Warden. That card is not super useful against most Feln setups, but I am a little bit surprised by that just because it is, like a beefy Aegis unit that heals you, and that's always like a huge amount of improvement in your board state. The Sabotage here is a pretty difficult lead-in. Mouche probably wants to throw the Wisdom here and does, just to get a little bit of extra stuff into his hand and make sure that the Sabotage doesn't get rid of his small draws. On the other hand, his Channel the Tempest is perfectly safe, so I think he's just looking for an unseal or something and didn't find it.
Yeah, Sabotage is really, really powerful here from SooNo because that makes that got rid of Mouche's answer, or one of Mouche's answers for this champion, but drawing the Thunderstrike Dragons helped a lot. Oh, and
Yeah.
wow, Eye of Winter is going to do tons of work here.
Oh man, Eye of Winter's such a good card against Felon Control. It pops the Aegises on the Champion of Cuttings, it locks down parts of the board. It's just really quite difficult and aggressive to deal with. And Mouche, I think, doing the right play here in playing down the Thunderstrike Dragon and then playing the Eye of Winter second. So next turn he can pop the Aegis on Champion, kill the Champion with the channel, and then just be pretty happy to ready to go. However, if SooNo sabos his channel, he's going to be a sad panda.
Yeah, definitely. So now that I'm taking a closer look at SooNo's list, he's playing 4 copies of In Cold Blood in the main board. Obviously, this is not game 1, so there's some changes that could have happened. And that Thunderstruck Dragon is actually a one of from the sideboard, which is very interesting.
Yeah, it's a solid card against Felon decks just because it's card advantage that tends to work out pretty well. Mouche actually playing the Throne Warden here, as opposed to using Channel to kill the champion. He's not too worried about the champion just yet. He's just trying to gain a little life and get a little bit of board position out, force SooNo to play reactively to him. But the second champion here is kind of an issue. And with Eye of Winter only popping Aegises, Mouche is going to have more of a problem with that card than he's going to have with other options.
Now he has the option of channeling one of the... okay, well, he looks like he's not going to go for that. Otherwise, he would have popped the Aegis on the other champion.
Yeah, he's
just electing to get down this Thunderstrike, try to mitigate all of the damage rather than just some.
Yeah, I'm a little worried about this line of play just because SooNo is pretty much guaranteed to have a lot of removal in his hand, so he's going to be able to continue to push through, and those Champions of Cuttings get out of control if they're left alone for too long. The shadow influence that SooNo needs hasn't shown up yet, but he's sitting on 9 or 10 cards, so he's probably got some draw to get into it, and with that, yeah, he's definitely having some issues there if the champion suddenly becomes a 9/5 that's unanswered on board.
So you can't see SooNo's hand, correct?
No, we can't see SooNo's hand at the moment. We're trying to get a spectator
so
cam.
let me read it out for you because I'm over here watching it. He has in his hand 2 backlashes, a Dark Return, an additional Sabotage, which he's playing here.
Oh goodness, yeah, that second Sabo. That's the reason why you don't want to hold on to the Channel of the Tempest.
Yep. And this Bloodcaster we just played, and then he has Daraka and Black Sky Harbinger, which are going to do a lot of work. Daraka is really powerful here, just going to take out this Thunderstrike, allow him to get through with this Champion of Cunning, and then Black Sky Harbinger, just another good threat to play on this board.
Yep, Daraka does knock the Thunderstrike out of the way, and that puts Champion in a prime position to attack. SooNo's still not sitting on the necessary influence to get the champion going, but as soon as that happens, this game gets a lot scarier. Mouche, on the other hand, has some Eye of Winters here. He can stun 2 different targets, but he can't stun enough targets to not take 5 this turn. So it's going to be really, really tricky. He's going to be able to pop through the champion Aegises, but he has no harsh roll effect. He has no way to sort of just clear the board of all of these threats. And he can't pay for the Eye of Winters and the Mistveiled Drake in the same turn. So he's basically just going to take 5 here, keep the champions locked down, still doesn't have an answer to the champion with the Aegis, and the only thing that's saving him right now is the 1 health, which did you say that SooNo had a Black Sky Harbinger?
Yeah, Black Sky Harbinger, and he just drew another Daraka. Plus, he has 2 backlashes, so I don't think there was... Even if this first Daraka hadn't come down, I think that SooNo's hand just matches up so well with what Mouche is doing, even aside from having some card advantage over him. Just having Dark Return to get back his super valued threats like Champion of Cunning, and the 2 backlashes to answer anything Mouche plays just puts him in a really powerful position in this control mirror.
Well, SooNo misses lethal here with the Black Sky Harbinger, but Mouche also kind of mismanages his Eye of Winters there. He was maybe able to. He probably wouldn't have been able to knock out both Champion of Cunnings. So dealing with the air threats was certainly kind of key, but the Mist Veil Drake was probably not going to help enough with that. So a little bit tricky. Goes down 2. So that's Mouche down 0-2, I believe. So SooNo takes it.
Okay. So that's going to be, I believe, our last matchup for this round. So yeah, like you said, SooNo taking that match 2-0 over Mouche. Traditional or 2-faction control, definitely not a traditional Felon control list. We've seen Felon evolve very rapidly after the nerfs to Vera, and then now all these sweet new primal cards that it's received.
Yeah, pretty good set of games, and hopefully we'll see some more. I mean, I think we're going to see a lot of primal in this tournament. I haven't looked at the deck lists yet, but there's plenty of cool cards to be experimenting with.
Yeah, definitely. So I think we're going to cut it off there for round 1, and then we'll catch you guys all back in round 2.
See you next time, folks.